Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining our live event. My name is Victoria, and I work for Factorial HR, which is an all in one HR software company offering digital solutions to HR professionals all around the world. Today, we are very excited to have with us Clinton Wingrove. He will be discussing the topic employee performance management for a modern workforce. Hello, Clinton, and welcome.
Hi there, glad to be with you.
First, let me introduce Clinton to all of you. Clinton is the CEO and principal HR consultant at Clinton HR Ltd. He enables managers and HR professionals to achieve management mastery, unleash their potential, and transform performance. Clinton is also a speaker, author, master trainer, and executive coach. He works with managers, teams, and organizations to realize their true potential and maximize their performance. During the next hour, Clinton will discuss these focus points. Why don't traditional performance management processes work? Why don't most objective setting processes improve results? How does remote working make a difference? What can a manager do to enhance the performance of their team? And it may be simple, it may not be simple, but how easy can it be? Before we start, I'd like to invite you to tell us in the chat where you're tuning in from. Also, feel free to ask your questions throughout the event. I will write them down and Clinton will answer them in the Q&A section in the end. We also invite you to subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can follow our future live events. Hello Clinton again and welcome. We are very happy to have you with us today and you can take over from here.
Excellent, thank you, Victoria. So I believe you'll be putting my slides up, correct?
Exactly.
There we go. Excellent. Welcome, everybody. As Victoria said, I'm Clinton Wingrove, delighted to be with you. This is one of the topics that I get really passionate about. And as we come out of the pandemic, I think the whole issue of how we optimize performance is going to become a critical issue. And as Victoria said, I want to cover a number of topics. Why don't some of the traditional things, which frankly, it seems many organizations still are implementing, why don't they actually work? Why don't they produce the optimum return that we would expect? I want to look at how remote working has made a difference, because clearly that's affected the vast majority of us. And many organizations are still operating with large percentages of people working remotely. I want to look at what managers can do to enhance performance. We often talk about performance management when actually we're not talking about performance management. What most organizations call performance management is really around assessing and monitoring and measuring. It's not actually about managing and influencing. So I want to look at why is it that we don't do what we really need to do, which is actually to optimize performance. And of course, the answer is it's not very simple. But I'm hoping that at the end of the session, you'll understand that it can actually be easy. So let's start with a question. Yeah, why do you do things and do them well? And I want you to rhetorically answer that question. Think about it. Think about the things that you do really well. Think about the things where you are optimizing your performance. And there's probably some very simple criteria that those things meet. Firstly, you know what to do. And of course, that's partly why we have the traditional objective setting process. We want people to know what to do. But knowing what to do isn't enough. We also need to know how to do it, or at least how to find out. Things are changing rapidly. So in some organizations, you may not currently know how to do things. Your staff may not currently know how to do them. So we need to find out how to do them. But even that isn't enough. What we need is people to be committed to them. And of course, this is where we make one of our mistakes. We make the big mistake that assuming that because someone's agreed to a set of objectives, that they're actually committed to them. And what we now know is that frequently that's not the case. And the worrying thing is, if we look at it from an analytical perspective, frequently the very people that performance management is aimed at are not the people that it actually works for. So typically, that's one of our big challenges. Because you see, what often happens is the things that you do and you do well, frequently you're reminded to do them, but sometimes reminded yourself. You realize that you'd like to do them, or things trigger you to do them. Calendar invites, invited to meetings, someone prompts you. Typically as well, the net experience is positive. What we now know from neuroscience, what we know from studies of behavioral engineering studies, we know that if people do things and their net experience is positive, they're very likely to do them again. They're very likely to try and improve. But if we get people to do things and the net experience is neutral or negative, typically they will slow down or they'll even stop. So why don't traditional processes improve results then, if we know that those are the criteria that we need to meet? And the answer is lots of things. Yeah, though largely they were designed many, many years ago. Most of our traditional performance management processes, the processes with the annual goal setting, the processes with the formal reviews, the processes with the appraisals, the processes with the calibration process, most of those were designed and developed in the 60s. When command and control management was the norm, that we didn't even have email, communications were incredibly slow. It was about the annual results of the organization that mattered. People were typically obedient and loyal and more dependent. We know that recent studies have shown that the level of cynicism is increasing and the level of loyalty is decreasing, and that's been accelerated during COVID. We didn't know how our brains work. We didn't understand the concepts of reinforcement and behavioral engineering. And as I said, typically the people who follow the traditional processes are not the people for whom they're actually designed. So traditional performance management processes weren't designed to enhance performance. They were largely designed as governance. They were to set the standards by which we could measure progress and success, and they were designed for the purposes of control. Neither of those processes typically improves performance. It doesn't inspire people, it doesn't get people excited. And if we focus for a minute on objective setting processes, what we know is that objective setting processes do work, but for a very tiny group of people. A tiny group of people who are really committed to achieving those. And we often cite, for example, Olympic athletes. We say, look, setting the goal to get the gold medal is what made them great. No, it isn't. They were committed to achieving the gold. But what made them great was frequent triggers to change the way in which they perform their sport, the coaching reminders every day, the feedback they got every hour, reviewing the videos of what they'd done. It wasn't the objective that led to the optimum performance. And in many organizations, the natural tension between the employees' expectations and the managers reduces the objectives, actually brings the level down. Typically, the people who need the performance managed the most work for the weakest managers. And consequently, the objective setting process doesn't drive up performance. And sometimes the objectives even become limiting factors, that once people have achieved an objective, they move on to something else rather than asking the question, could I do better? Could I do more? And with those requiring performance management, lack of clarity around the objectives is not usually what limits their performance. What limits their performance is their motivation or possibly their capability. And now we've got the pace of change. Annual timelines are too long to have any significant motivational impact. We now know that our attention levels are rapidly decreasing. Our attention spans are decreasing. The speed at which change occurs is increasing. And of course, hybrid working has made this even more complex. And what we now know is working in a hybrid world, we've got lots of additional factors that we have to take account of. We've got a cognitive disconnect where we used to struggle to have conversations with our manager. We may now have lots of Teams meetings or Google meetings or Zoom meetings, but those don't build relationships. They don't pass that informal information. So we've got these issues that are adding to the problem. We've got a cognitive disconnect, a lack of flow of informal information, and we've got a reducing level of empathic responses, which means the quality of relationships is decreasing. And whilst the vast majority of people now report more contact with their manager, most of that is in the context of multi-people meetings. That's not an environment in which the manager can influence individual performance. And quite the contrary, what we're seeing is, as a result of virtual working, we're seeing increased levels of anxiety and concern. We've got the highest levels of anxiety and concern on record. We're also seeing weaker relationships due to the lack of informal interactions. And we're seeing increased levels of fatigue. And many organizations are claiming that with remote working, their productivity is increased. I've yet to see detailed quality data that actually substantiates that. Quite the contrary, I've seen in many organizations, busyness and activity is increasing, but output per dollar spent on payroll does not appear to be increasing. And quite the contrary, we're seeing significant increases in lost time work. So the question then is, how do we manage people remotely? How do we manage in a modern world? And the answer is, it's not simple. And many organizations try to oversimplify. And I love one of the quotes that came from one of the research projects back in the 60s, where it said the simplest performance appraisal is a blank sheet of paper. And that is factually absolutely accurate. But if you ask the question, what's the most difficult performance appraisal to complete? The answer is a blank sheet of paper. And we frequently confuse simplicity with ease. Managing performance isn't simple. The trick is, how do we perform the magic and make it easy? And that's what I'd like to share with you, some very easy techniques, some very easy methods that can improve the management of performance and achieve genuine influence. And the first one is, we've got to avoid taking the shortcut and assuming that having team meetings will increase the performance of our team. By pulling people together, will you increase team collaboration? Absolutely. Yeah. Will people enjoy having multiple people meetings? Absolutely. But will it equip you as a manager to influence any one of the individuals within the team? And the answer is almost certainly no. So we have to stop making that assumption that by pulling the team together and having a conversation with them, we will significantly influence the performance of individuals. If you want to influence the performance of individuals, we need to have frequent one-to-one discussions, one-to-one conversations. And those conversations have got to do a number of things. We've got to have conversations with each of our staff individually, which will equip them to perform. We've got to have conversations that will remind those who need reminding what we need them to do and how we want to do them. We need conversations that will trigger new activities if they're not being seen. We need conversations that will reinforce, that will inspire, that will give them recognition, that will make them feel valued. And we need to call out poor performance as and when that may be required. And of course, one hopes that that's not. And a lot of people say, but we can't have frequent one-to-one conversations. We don't have the time. Here's the point. I believe that in the current environment, with our low levels of attention, our low levels of attention span and quality, the conversations around performance, which will influence performance, should probably be around about 7 minutes maximum. And I often refer to the 7-minute performance conversations. And the reason I say that is that's the sort of conversation that you can tack on to the end of another conversation, you can tack on to a meeting, and it's relatively easy to find an opportunity to speak with an individual for 7 minutes. it's much, much harder to find the opportunity to speak to them for an hour. And if you speak to them for an hour, they're going to remember the first thing you said and the last thing that you said, and everything in the middle is going to be forgotten. That's the nature of our recall. It's the nature of our attention. And neuroscience has now proven that. So let's focus on using the time that we need. And there's two reasons why we need to have those conversations. The first one is we need to understand the performance of each of our employees. So we need to have a conversation. In most cases, we can get some data through systems, etc. But you get the real essence, you get to the heart of how motivated someone is if you have the conversation with them. But the really important thing is, do they know their performance? And this is something we often miss in performance management. As a manager, of course, I need to know how well each employee is doing. But what's critically important is they know. Because if they don't know how well they're performing or how not well they're performing, why would they change? Why would they improve? Why would they feel successful? So we need to have those conversations to check that they know and ensure that we know. And then let's look at the style of conversation. I'm suggesting that we have multiple conversations, frequent conversations with each of our employees, and that they should be relatively short. As I said, something in the order of 7 minutes. That means focusing on a specific at a time. Again, there is no point having a conversation in depth over 5 or 6 objectives with an employee, because what they will take away, what they will remember, what will change their behavior is going to be limited to 1 or 2 things. So each time we interact with them, let's focus on the thing that matters the most. And that might be one objective. It might be how they do one task. It might be one aspect of their development. It might be one thing that needs improving. So the first thing is we should focus, and we tell them that. Yeah, Julie, can we spend a couple of minutes talking about your objective on sales? Yeah, Fred, can we spend a couple of minutes? I'd like to talk to you about how you're handling the meetings. So we focus. The next thing is we should ask questions. Why? We want the employee talking about the performance. Why? Because if they're committed to something, they will want to talk about it. They will be able to talk about it. The objective here is not for us to speak to them. The objective is for us to get them talking. That way we know they're thinking about the performance. So I would ask them questions. Tell me about how you're doing. Tell me about the progress that you've made. Tell me what you've achieved in the last week. Tell me what your next step is. And we should be listening attentively. And we now know that in virtual work, we are typically only actively listening about 1/3 of the time if we're on a virtual telephone, a virtual call, video call, or audio call. We've got to learn to focus and listen, because that's the only way we'll understand each other. And only when we've heard the employee express the detail should we then step in and provide our input. That input might be a recalibration of their understanding. It might be clarification on priorities. It might be giving them some feedback. It might be giving them recognition. But we should withhold doing that until we've understood their perspective. There should then be a very brief, so are we agreed? What have we agreed to? And lastly, we should always finish every conversation securing a commitment. So what is it you're going to do differently going forward? What is it you're going to improve? What is it you're going to work on? What is it you need me to do? But there should be some commitment. So we need to think about the very, very simple structure. And a conversation of 7 minutes, you can actually apply this structure very effectively. So now the question is, what do we talk to the employee about? And I believe there are 7 critical topics. And these are, again, my 7 key topics. So 7-minute conversations, each conversation focusing on one of these topics, and within that topic, probably one element. So let's go through each of the 7 of them. The 7 of them. The first one is engagement and wellness. As a manager, I need to know how committed is each of my employees? How motivated are they? What's their current state of mind? Now, of course, in the current environment, for some of them, that may be that they're anxious, the wellness needs to be attended to, which is why I've combined the two. The second thing is I need to know that they understand the priorities. Why? Because if employees understand the relative priorities, they will make intelligent decisions when conflicts occur. If they don't understand the priorities, they will make decisions that might be inappropriate. The third one is performance expectations, and we'll come back to that in a moment. That includes objectives, but I believe that's not the primary expectation they should understand. The fourth one is the measures and evidence and feedback. How do we know what performance actually is? The next one is recognition and positive reinforcement. We should be seeking opportunities, frequent opportunities to give people recognition and positive reinforcement. And unfortunately, occasionally we may have to do performance correction. And a lot of performance management talk is around how we have the difficult conversations. If you have the really positive conversations, if people understand the priorities, they're motivated, the expectations are clear, the incidence of having to have performance correction conversations dramatically reduces. And then lastly, performance blockers. What is it that's stopping performance improving? So let's look at each of those quickly, one at a time. So I'm going to have a conversation with you as an employee of mine about engagement and wellness. What am I trying to do? I'm trying to monitor and respond to your motivation, your well-being. So what am I trying to do? I'm listening to understand. I'm listening to hear. How do you describe, how do you answer, for example, the question, how are things? I'm looking for an opportunity to demonstrate empathy. Why? Because I need to show you that I understand the situation you face. If you know that I'm empathic for what your circumstances, you're more likely to have open conversations with me. You're more likely to support me. So I've got to learn as well what unleashes your motivation. Yeah, and the theory is that money motivates. We now know that with some exceptions, and there are exceptions, and typically those people will take sales jobs, they'll go into investment banking, for example, they will perhaps become executives, directors, and stakeholders and shareholders in companies. But the vast majority, so long as they're paid enough, money does not motivate, and there's significant evidence to support that, and some great videos out on TED.com and YouTube. Most of us are motivated by other things. We're motivated by collaboration, by being part of a team, by feeling that we're adding value, having a purpose. So what is it that motivates each of you? And then build trust. If I want you to increase your performance, you have to trust me. You have to trust that I'm going to be asking you to do things that really matter, that I'm going to cover your back, that I'm going to have your back, that I'm going to support you. And that means I'm probably going to need to coach you. I'm going to need to coach you so that you can actually look after your well-being and resilience. And I find a lot of employees are expressing burnout and saying, you know, that the work-life balance has gone, they're burnt out. Frankly, if that's the case, there hasn't been quality conversations between them and the manager prior to that happening. And that means sometimes we have to initiate support. So one of the things I would think about for each of my staff is this a topic that today I should be having with each of my staff? For some people, the answer will be yes, for some, no. I talked about priorities. Most people run their workday driven by urgency. And President Eisenhower developed the Eisenhower model. It's recently been updated and adopted by Covey with a slightly different scaling, but the same principle applies. What we need to help our employees understand is they should know what the priorities are, what really matters, and they should be spending their time on that. And what we know from research is the average professional spends approximately 50% of their time on things that are not relatively important. There are things like unnecessary meetings, emails that shouldn't have been copied to them, rework, distractions, speaking to people that can't influence the outcomes, a whole variety of things. We need to make sure that each of our employees understands the priorities, and that typically means they need to understand how their contribution fits into the wider whole. And that takes a conversation. Yeah. We need to ask people, why do you do what you do? And if they can't give us a good reason, that means they don't understand the importance of what they do. I've come across employees who say, I just do. I never want an employee doing things which they can describe as just activities. I'm just the receptionist. I'm just the administrator. I'm just the analyst. Yeah. We want employees being proud of what they do. And that means they need to understand what really matters. And they need to be prepared. They need to be equipped. They need to be capable of saying no when they're asked to do things that fall into those bottom two categories. Relatively unimportant, whether it's urgent or not, it shouldn't be consuming their time. The next topic we might talk to an employee about is performance expectations. And typically people say, well, this is performance management. I say, no, all of these 7 topics are performance management, and this is one of them. Of course, we want employees to know what needs to be achieved. And of course, that's often described in terms of annual objectives. The problem is things change so fast that employees rarely get excited by annual objectives. What we want them to be excited about is what is it they've got to do next? What have they got to do this week, next week, this month? So we need to have conversations with them more about the milestones, more about the short-term issues. And that's again why we need the frequent conversations. Yes, we can have the annual objectives. They help us measure progress. Yes, at the end of the year, they give us calibration and objectivity, but they don't inspire people. We need people excited about what are they going to achieve next week? What are they going to be working on next week? Who are they going to be doing that with? And that means we also need to be having conversations about how are they going to do it and the standards by which that'll be judged. What's the optimum methodology? How could they improve that? What are they going to do to make that better, faster, quicker, more economical? And what are they going to do to grow? We need to have a conversation frequently with each of our staff around how are they going to polish their capability, because if they stand still, they're going backwards. Every employee should be developing at some point. So one of the conversations is around performance expectations, and we need to have multiple ones. Now, do those expectations need to be specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound? Of course they do. But what's important is having the conversation so that we know that they really understand and they're committed to doing what we need them to do in the short term. And then we need to address the measures and evidence. And of course, this means, again, we have conversations. Remember the sequence of the conversation. Focus on a topic and ask them questions. Fred, I'd like to talk to you about the progress you're making on Project X. Can you talk me through how are we tracking our progress on that? Now, Fred should then give me the measures, the evidence, should describe to me what's actually happening. And one of the things we do is we simplify and we say, well, we've got to achieve, 2%, or we've got to achieve 3 million sales. And then when we come to the appraisal discussion, we have this argument about, well, I was told to achieve 3 million sales. I've achieved 2,999,000. So now you tell me I've failed. And people say, this is stupid. And the answer is sometimes the way in which we defined performance expectations is stupid. For many things that we do, there's a range. There's a target, which is probably the maximum we could ever expect you to achieve. There's the standard, which is what we want you to achieve. That's what we'll consider to be good performance. But we also need to clarify what the minimum is. Very often people get put on performance improvement plans and are surprised because they didn't think their performance was low enough to justify that. Why? Because we didn't have the conversation around what's a legitimate range to expect. So when we're talking with our staff, we need to talk intelligently. Sometimes we need to discuss the range. Sometimes it's not as simple as X. The next topic of conversation is around recognition and positive reinforcement. We know that broadly staff, particularly if they're working remotely, want four things. They want clarity. What's the expectations of them given that they're now working in a remote or a hybrid environment? They want assurance that they're going to be treated as equally as the people who are actually working on site. They want the assurance that whilst you can't guarantee their job, you're doing everything you can to support them and back them up and to keep them informed. They want recognition. They want recognition not just for what they've achieved, but for the effort that they've put in, given the circumstances that prevail. And lastly, they want empathy. They want you to demonstrate that you understand the situation that they're in. And sometimes that's as simple as describing it to them. So sorts of things that you might do. Yeah, clarify the expectations, but of course that merely enables them to perform. And then we say, well, we give people feedback, but sometimes feedback isn't always as positive as it feels. And so what happens is we don't give feedback, and that leads to uncertainty. And often feedback we deliver is criticism. And whilst that often produces a short-term result, behavior engineering's theory now says that if you use criticism as a means of improving performance, its effect is short-term and its long-term effect is negative. And people get into the immune to the criticism, and eventually they decide to get even. So we really need to focus on providing recognition and positive reinforcement. That's what brings out the inner motivation. And as a manager, that's why it's so important that we know how, not only what they've achieved, but how they've done it. Because only then can we go to them and give them the positive recognition. Julie, I really liked the way you handled that presentation last week, particularly when you were challenged on your data that you presented. I like the fact that you paused, you thought before you answered, and then you gave a very detailed response. Julie, that was brilliant. Yeah. That detailed recognition, tell them what you observed and why you liked it. That will typically bring far more positive performance change than criticism will do. And lastly, we sometimes just need to trigger and reinforce the right behaviors. Sometimes we just need to have a conversation with people because they're just not doing what they know that they should do. You know, how many of us have bought treadmills and then used them as coat racks? How many of us have bought gym memberships and not attended? And this is the reality in the real world. And if we're trying to manage performance, that typically means we're trying to lift the performance of the lower performers. We've got to focus on the things that are going to work. And we know that triggering, reinforcing, and positive recognition are dramatically more effective than other things. But of course, sometimes we have to have a performance correction conversation. And again, this should be specific, a single topic. Yeah, if we're going to have a performance correction conversation, they should be done in a timely way at the earliest opportunity, not the last opportunity. And we should hold them promptly and discreetly. They should be held in private, not in public. And the first thing, again, this is why we've stressed the importance of the cycle of the conversation. The first thing we should ask is, how do they view their performance? Do they actually understand the expectation? Because people don't take jobs intending to perform badly. Very often there are misunderstandings. Very often they don't realize how they're performing. So if you need to improve someone's performance, in other words, it's falling below par, the first two questions should be, how do they view their performance? What's the expectation they believe they should be meeting? Only then, if there's a misalignment, should we then go into providing input? Do you remember in the conversation we said focus, ask questions, then provide input? If we have to provide input, if we're going to have a difficult conversation, then we state the behavior that we observe or the performance that we are seeing. We state or restate the expectation that we have, which we now know whether they understand that or not. We then ask them what they need to be able to deliver that, because it may be something's inhibiting them, something's blocking them. So ask them, yeah. So Fred, yeah, I've explained the performance I'm seeing. I've explained the performance I'd like you to deliver. What do you need from me in order that you can meet that expectation? And that gives them an opportunity then to explain that, which of course then we will actually handle. But the most important thing is we then ask for their commitment, because remember I said right at the beginning, the only things that we do and do well are the things that we're committed to. So we need to ask them to describe their commitment. We need to get that commitment. Now that may, if it's a formal warning situation, you may want that in writing, but usually it's enough to simply ask for it in orally. And what's the seventh topic? I said there were 7 topics. The last topic, performance blockers. And again, you should only cover one of these in each performance conversation. This is 7 minutes. Focus on one topic of conversation, one element within it. Likewise, performance blockers, it's one topic. So I might choose today to ring Priyanka or contact Priyanka through Teams and say, Priyanka, I'd like to just have a chat with you. We haven't had a chat for a while. Yeah, tell me, what's going on that's inhibiting your performance? What makes life difficult for you? What gets in the way? What frustrates you? Just by zeroing in on that as a topic, you'll be astonished at what people will tell you. Yeah. And again, if any of you have ever watched the television program, The Undercover Boss, it just shows how little frequently when we get into managerial positions, we really understand about what happens at the coalface where people are actually working. So we need to periodically, you have to decide how often, and sometimes you'll do it more often with some people than others, but have a 7-minute conversation asking them, what's inhibiting you performing at a higher level? So I've covered a lot of material. Let's quickly summarize. Number 1, I'm challenging you. Yes, have your formal reviews, have your annual objective setting, have your performance appraisal processes, but recognize that those are part of corporate governance. They're part of the management of the organization. If you want to improve performance, if you want to manage performance, if you want to bring out the best in your staff, you need to have really effective, short, focused conversations, and lots of them on 7 topics. But each conversation should be clearly structured. Choose the focus, which of the topics, and then ask the employee to describe that situation to you from their perspective, and listen attentively. Listen to what they say, listen to the emotions, listen to the hidden messages. Only then provide your input, your recognition, your feedback, your evidence, your advice, your challenge. Always seek to agree. Yeah, find something that you can agree on and secure commitment to a next step. So think in terms of having multiple conversations of that nature. They will be far, far more effective, and they are very, very good uses of time. And then quick summary, the 7 topics. Yeah, these are the 7 topics. And each day, if you're going to speak to one or more of your employees, decide which of these is the most important. Does this individual need some attention? So perhaps you talk to them about their engagement and wellness. Yeah. Which of the employees do you think is not tracking their performance well, or you don't have the evidence on? So talk about the measures and the evidence. Yeah. Which employee do you think could give you great ideas? So you might have a performance blocker conversation. So think about which topic you're going to have and have those conversations frequently and using the structure I've just described. I guarantee you this is a significantly better process for bringing out the best in employees. I promised Victoria I'd aim at 40 minutes. According to my watch, Victoria, we're dead on 40 minutes, so my performance met standard on that count. Do we have any questions?
Yes, thank you so much for this lovely presentation, Clinton. Now we have a lot of questions. I also noticed a lot of them about one-to-one meetings, so this is very interesting. Let's move on to the Q&A part of this live event. So one of the questions is, what is the most important part of a one-to-one meeting?
The most important part of the one-to-one meeting is the start and the end. So I know that's two most important, but it's the sandwich. Yeah, setting the tone. What is it we're going to talk about? Yeah. So setting that tone. I'd like to spend a few minutes discussing X. I'd like to talk to you about setting that tone. And the second one is ending with some agreement and some commitment, whatever that might be. Because if you're going to invest that 7 minutes, that's really key. And the only way you're ever going to do that is by focusing on listening to the other person and being empathic. We know now that if you do that, you will build the relationships. If you don't listen and you're not empathic, actually what will happen is you trigger the fight and flight syndrome, which is clearly negative.
Nice. Another thing about this is, how often should we have one-to-one meetings, and where should a one-to-one meeting take place? Maybe in nature?
Great question. The one-to-one meetings, which are the formal corporate governance, yeah, your calibration meetings, your appraisals, your project reviews, and so on, clearly those should be less frequent. What I'm advocating here is the role of a manager is to influence, inspire, and optimize the performance of their people. So I believe, frankly, you should be aiming. Now, I know some of you may have too many people to do this with, but as a general principle, you should have at least a one-to-one conversation with every one of your staff every day. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. We should
But remember, I'm suggesting it's something around 7 minutes. Now, you might have another 7 minutes on another topic as well. But in terms of a performance discussion, one of these 7 topics, yeah, you should be aiming at one a day with your people.
Yes, exactly. Another thing is, what are the roles of the managers and the roles of the employees in a one-to-one meeting? So, again, another thing
The
connected to this.
optimum is to position the conversations, and that's why the structure I've suggested is important. I don't want employees expecting me to tell them what their performance is. I make it quite clear to my employees, your job is to know how well you're performing, and your job is to tell me, because it's your performance. It's not my performance, it's your performance. So I expect you to perform well. I expect you to know how well you are performing. I expect you to know where you need to improve, and I expect you to tell me. So I position it that way. And I think too many performance management processes put the onus on the manager. And that's why, again, you'll notice I said start the conversation by asking the employee. And employees will suddenly get wise. When the third time that you have a conversation with them and you ask them to describe to you how they're performing, etc., the next time you have a conversation, I guarantee you they'll be ready. Yeah.
Yes.
They get wise. And the message goes round. They'll actually be in the washroom saying, you want to watch out. Now Clint's the manager. If you have a conversation with him, he'll expect you to know how well you're performing. You better be ready. That's exactly what we want.
Yes, but I think that everything comes down to good communication. So,
Absolutely.
Yes, that's most important thing, of course. Okay, another question says, how can we encourage employees to want to improve their performance?
There's two things there. One is, as I've just said, if we have frequent conversations with them where we're demonstrating a genuine interest and we're asking them about their performance, we're asking them about what they're doing well. And when they do well, we have, we use that topic, which is recognition, and we recognize them and we praise them for doing it. That in itself will actually have a dramatic effect. And most performance appraisals don't have that effect. I mean, I'm not going to ask you to put hands up if if you always find appraisals motivating, because most people sit on their hands when you ask that question. Yeah, but these types of conversations can be inspiring. Why? Because you're going to have deliberate, focused conversations, giving them positive recognition. But the thing that really matters, and Dan Pink talks about this in one of his videos on motivation, is people want to feel that they're doing something worthwhile. And that's why it's so important that we have a conversation with people about what the priorities are. Why do we do this stuff? Why are we being asked to achieve these objectives? Why are we selling these software systems? Why are we providing service to the customers who are using our software tools? Why are we processing all of this admin? And if people understand why, then they have a reason to come to work. But if they view their work as it's just admin, I'm just doing this, I'm doing this because we've been told to, yeah, that's not going to be inspiring. So the role of a manager is to bring that alive, talk about the priorities, talk about the bigger issue. And it doesn't take long. It can take literally a few minutes to explain to people why something matters. Let me give you an example of a receptionist. I had a receptionist in a client of mine, who when I came into the building, she greeted me with yes. And I thought, that's not a good greeting. Anyway,
Yeah.
cut a long story short, I had a conversation with the CEO, and the atmosphere in the clients was toxic. And when I talked to the receptionist, she said, "Oh, my job is just to handle the people when they come in." And I said to the CEO, you need to ensure that receptionist understands she's the only person in the company who sees everybody who comes into the building. She's critically important. She's the
She's the
she's the
face.
first person people see. So if
Yes.
she gives them a smile and makes them feel happy, that has a dramatic effect. She is not just a receptionist. She is the receptionist. And
Yes. She's
sometimes
the
as
face of the
managers, we just
company.
don't get that language right. We don't get that emphasis right.
Yes, exactly. She's the face of the company, so she is
Yeah,
the first person and is the first impression that you get of the company.
absolutely.
Of course. Another thing, how can we as employees persuade our managers to hold regular one-to-ones?
Relatively simple. And this is both simple and easy. And that is we contact them.
Yeah.
We don't persuade them to book the meeting with us. We book the meeting with them. We tell them that we want to talk to them. But have something specific and clear to talk to them about. Yeah, talk to them about any one of these 7 topics. These are topics that the conversation should occur on. So I don't
Mm,
think we need to persuade them. We trigger the conversation, and in triggering it, they will start to see the value. So
mm.
I would take it that way round.
Okay. Another thing, what are the best ways to improve work performance and to motivate remote workers? So this is more
Yeah,
about
the
remote.
answer again, I think, comes down the same. It's frequent, short, focused conversations, making sure that we have more conversations which are around the positive recognition, the positive acknowledgement of what's being done. And with remote workers, it's talking to them individually. Yeah, I don't know if you're aware, but a study was done prior to the pandemic, and in the USA, there were 11 million business meetings per day. The latest estimate is that there are 29 million now, and that's largely because of the use of virtual tools. The problem is it's the number of multiple attendee meetings that's dramatically increased. And if you attend a meeting with other people, only one person speaks at any time, and they do not build strong one-to-one relationships. They might build team cohesion. You know who's in the team, you know what they're doing. We've got to have more, and that might mean we go back to having less of the team ones, but we've got to have more one-to-one quality conversations. And that's what I'm arguing here. We've got to speak to people on a one-to-one basis, because that way you can feel the empathy, that way you know you're being heard.
Yes, exactly. And this question is also similar, but it tackles a different topic, like how can we monitor employee performance, and do we need to hire coaches for this specifically?
Yeah, that's a big question, because it very much depends on the work that they're doing. I'm appalled by the fact that the use of computerized monitoring has shot through the roof, particularly in the US. Software that monitors people's use of their computers. Interestingly, so has sales of software that makes your computer look as though you're using it. So, yeah, there's always an antidote. But on a serious note, it does depend. Clearly, there are jobs that you can monitor very, very easily. So if you've got an administrative team, you can monitor that. If you've got call centers, you can monitor the calls. If you've got salespeople, you can monitor the sales that they're achieving. The real issue, though, is how do you know how enthusiastic people are about what they're doing? How do you know how well they're doing? How do you know how committed they are to doing stuff at the earliest opportunity rather than the latest? And the answer is the only way you're going to know that is literally by speaking to them. You know,
Yes.
all the reports in the world will never tell you, how they feel. They'll never tell you whether people are really engaged. And I'm very supportive of engagement surveys and so on, but the vast majority of them, that the quality of the data is poor because the response rates are insufficient for you to have really captured the people who are not engaged, because they don't even bother to answer the surveys. So we've got to be very careful about metrics. If you've got routine administrative tasks, you've probably got metrics in the business, but that still doesn't tell you, have they got a smile on their face when they do it? Are they motivated to do more tomorrow? The only way you know that is by having a conversation. And we've got to develop the skill of having a conversation that fits the modern world. And it goes right back to the title that Victoria, you gave to today. How do we manage performance in the modern world? In the 50s and the 60s, you could have 1 hour conversations. Why? Because things worked that slowly. People were very obedient. They had long attention spans. These days, that's not how it works. We have incredibly short attention spans. It's estimated the average person's attention span is 10 seconds, which is 2 seconds less than a goldfish. Our attention levels are very low. During this webinar, even if you were really trying hard, you probably were only consciously attentive about 1/3 to 50% of the time.
Yeah.
That's science speaking. So we've got to connect with people, and that means we're going to have short, sharp conversations with a focus, with a purpose on a specific topic, keep their attention and move on. And through those, you'll learn whether people are motivated or not.
Another question just came in for this topic as well, so I'll just connect it to this. How do you measure for administrative and support roles which cannot be quantified?
Yeah, this is always a challenge. And of course, somebody will always come up with a specific anecdote which will disprove my point. But I trained many years ago as a data analyst. I'm a rare person in HR in that I started out in computer systems design. I've gone through data analysis and data analytics, and I've arrived at HR via a circuitous route. But I'm going to tell you bluntly, the one thing I've learned is our ability to measure things is directly proportional to our desire to do it. There's always a way. Now, can you measure accurately the specific? Sometimes not, but you nearly always can measure an indicator. So the question is, is step back and have a conversation with the individual. How do we measure this? I've often had people say you can't measure the effectiveness of a receptionist. That's actually not true. You can. Some organizations actually ask people to provide feedback on their experience as they came into the building. You say, well, we wouldn't do that. Okay, so what else could you do? And the answer is there is nearly always a way. And I always say that the thing is, imagine that you were going to be sacked tomorrow if you couldn't measure it. What would you do? And for most of us, we come up with an answer. Yeah.
Nice. And another thing, what do you do once an employee is already burnt out?
Yeah, I think the first thing is you have to apologize. Because if an employee is burnt out, as a manager, we have, it's not the employee that's failed. As a manager, we've failed. Our responsibility is to achieve performance through people. That means we have a direct responsibility for their wellness and their engagement. So if they've burnt out, now you may say, but they burnt out because of personal circumstances. Yeah, guess what? Part of our job is to take that into account. That's what empathy means. Empathy means understanding their circumstances. So the first thing is, I think we need to apologize. The second thing is we need to very quickly get the attention that they need. And irrespective of the country that you're in, there are vast resources of material available to help people to self-diagnose. There are resources to provide clinical support. Most organizations, except the very small SMEs, will have HR departments which will offer some form of counseling. What we shouldn't do is mask it. As a manager, the minute that occurs, we need to what we call recover with action. We need to do something. And that means we've got to release the pressure. We've got to in somehow help the individual release the pressures on them. And we've got to take some form of corrective action. And as I say, that may mean reaching out and getting resources externally.
And while we're speaking about the resources, we have another question. Could you share some books on the steps of effective performance conversations?
I could probably provide that off the top of my head. I wouldn't want to do that, but Victoria, I can send something through to you which you can circulate or put up on the YouTube channel later on that.
Yes, we can pop that on the YouTube
and of course, you can actually, these slides will be available, which give you a lot of that information anyway.
Exactly, yes. We'll send them out after the webinar. And another question, because we need to slowly finish down. What are the modern practices of performance management? What are the market trends that are trending, and how can you improve, enhance the performance management? Like three questions in one.
I've tried to cover that in what I've shared with you today.
Yes.
We are seeing. Let me take a step back. We often ask what's best practice. Be very, very careful. Best practice is typically not best practice. It's what most organizations who are seen to be good are doing. That often doesn't mean it's best practice. That means it's common practice. And there's a lovely video out on YouTube which says majorities are nearly always wrong. Best practice is what works for you, what gives you the competitive edge. what I know is that the organizations that are trying to break the mold, the organizations that are realizing that we've got to fire up individuals, the essence of what they're doing is included in what I've covered here. They're going for, yes, we have the formal processes, but their governance, they are not what inspires people. Let's look for how we tap into individual emotions, how we tap into individual needs, how we focus on individuals. And so they're using some form of what I've shared with you. You know, they might call them frequent touch-ins. They may say informal performance reviews. They may use technology to capture the discussion and record it. But most of them are recognizing that in the contemporary world, the speed of change is such that you can't have things static, that things are changing every day, including what you want people to do tomorrow, next week, and the week after. You need to have the conversations because the virtual world has weakened our relationships. It's created a cognitive disconnect. It's created an empathic distance. So we need to have more conversations with people. We've got technology now, which means we can connect with people. We can be on video. We can do it quickly, easily. And from an employee or a manager's perspective, we can do it free because it comes with the technology the company has. So these are all the things that individual companies that are really trying to step change their performance management are doing. The question is, which of these would work well for you?
Exactly. Thank you so much, Clinton, for this wonderful presentation and for all of the responses to these questions. I really enjoyed our 1 hour discussion. We need to slowly finish down.
Sure.
So, thanks to everyone who attended this live event. In the following days, we'll send you all the resources via email, and as well, we'll provide you with several books that Clinton will suggest for you. For more HR events like this one and other videos connected to human resources, please subscribe to our YouTube channel and stay on top of all current trends. And also, don't hesitate to add me or Clinton on LinkedIn for any further questions or doubts you may have on this topic. Thank you so much.
Thanks,
Bye.
everybody. And if you want to email me personally, it's clinton@clintonhr.com. That's my personal email address. So I've given you the company one, but clinton@clintonhr is my personal one. I'll be delighted to respond.
Okay. Thank you so much, Clinton. Goodbye.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.